I'll start with the good news that it is possible to feed the future. But then again, right after saying that, the presenter kept on repeating that what kind of food are we going to feed the future? And I see that as a challenge that we are going to work on. Production is increasing, productivity is increasing, but then we were told about the challenge about the markets. We were told about the challenge about making sure people are accessing the required nutrients. Now, on top of that, I'm from Tanzania. And here, when I was listening to the presenters, I'm like, I am not sure what my Minister of Health will be thinking. Should I encourage people to eat more eggs? Or should I tell them to eat vegetables? Or should I tell them eat both, but in a required amount? But I am from Tanzania. When I get an increase in income, where do I want to spend it? I want to eat the fancy food, and all the food that I'm told is not nutritious. So if I am a Minister of Health and I have a constituency, it will be difficult to defend my position when I got to the poor people and I tell them, it is very important to eat eggs. I turn around, my Center of Research on Nutrition tells me, be careful, that is not a very good call. I go back and sit with the technocrats, most of them will be the middle income kind of people, and I tell them a different story. And they'll ask me, did you just heard you telling people to eat more eggs? And I thought today's presentation from the three presenters are really showing up what kind of discussions will be going on in our countries for quite a long time. But again, in as much as we are happy that we are able to feed the future, because we are able to increase production, and again, we encourage that the new varieties that will come up. At the same time, we have to really manage all the post-harvest losses, and that's the talk that I was speaking from the presentations here today. And in as much as Per, sorry if I mistake your name, said, you mentioned some of the goals that you're covering when we're talking about nutrition and hunger. I thought goal 17, that is talking about implementation, was something that you should have stressed more, because all the things that you were saying, without that, then nothing can actually take place. Or maybe with the last presenter, when he was talking about it's very important we make sure that we do invest in secondary towns, because by doing this, then we are going to actually not only encourage the youth not to move all the way to the cities, but at least they start in the secondary towns. I thought that was also a good move. But then again, at the same time, we need to have the private sector involved. The private sector will tell you, I'm only going to invest if I have money in this particular business I'm in. And the talk here today is, when we speak of nutrition, it is a public good. Now, where do we demarcate that? And that will be something that we should take on board. Why am I saying this? From Tanzania, we've seen a lot of privatization going on. We've seen businessmen really entwined in their businesses with the government people. So when they produce anything, they're also the same people who are providing funding for elections and what have you. So imagine, here I am, a big businessman, producing non-nutritious, let's say, milk or something, and here you are, you're telling me the milk I'm producing is not good. And I'm asking the minister to go and state this to the guy who is sponsoring this guy. So when I was listening to all this, I said, okay, this will be interesting. And last but not least, I like the argument talking about the falling share of GDP, the falling share of agriculture in GDP. The one thing that I think we need to be cautious is, just because there is a falling share of agriculture in GDP, it does not really translate into falling employment of the people who are employed in agriculture. Because we saw this in Tanzania. And to wind up, yes, food security is very important. We talk about access and availability, but we do require to get the nutrients that we want for the well-being, not just of us, but also the well-being of the people who will be working in our countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you for saving us the time. The second commentator is Emilio Tosta.
Good afternoon. I'm Emilio Tostão. I work for Eduardo Mondlane University, Maputo, Mozambique. I mean, being the last speaker after lunch is even difficult. After 3 professors, and then Kalima is even difficult. And here, but I would like to start my response considering some facts that I thought, came from these 3 presentations. Clearly, oversupply and serious drop in prices, but in countries like Mozambique, stunting still have not changed much. So this is not translating really into nutritional gains. And again, the other thing that we've learned is that aggregate analysis, may mask some regional differences. Okay, space matters. Targeting, especially women and children under 3, also matters. The second point I retained was the recognition that food and nutrition security is loosely related to income. But again, as Professor Rob, yes, pointed out, Voss. Well, one more minute. It's very hard to have inclusive growth without resolving the problem of agriculture. And I will comment more on that since my first speaker went to nutritional. Now, recommendations were made, and those are great recommendations. Who am I to question that? But what I would like to hear more, especially coming from Mozambique, is how do you do it? What to do, it's clear, but how do you go about doing it? How can we make those recommendations more informative? Take, for example, the need and recommendation to improve agricultural productivity. I mean, most farmers live in this vicious circle of poverty. Where do you start from? Because you need to break this circle of poverty. You subsidize to jumpstart production. And even so, you still need to deal with financial institutions, which might be reluctant to give you those resources because of past experiences. So that's a challenge. I also agree, yes, we need to invest in infrastructure. But again, I would like to hear more about other public goods, investment in research and agricultural extension, which is often lacking, and this is important for technology adoption and also for us passing good nutrition practices to those who most need. Now, R&D has been underfunded in countries like Mozambique, partly because of my interpretation of some of what World Bank has said in the past. So how do you change that? We need to invest in market, yes, but what in the places where there are not even markets? What do you do? Farmers have low purchasing power, and the private sector really has not grown enough. I mean, we talk about private sector, but where is the private sector? Or are we thinking of transforming those smallholder farmers into the private sector? I mean, this is where things get tougher, especially where I'm coming from. And so there's a void there to be filled. The government, what they've seen, they've been stepping back, so some policy reversals, because there's a vacuum. Private sector is not there, and the markets often also are not there, or very shallow. Well, yes, we need more productivity, and you need to integrate land and labor, and we need to integrate farmers into value chains. But those, again, are dispersed farmers everywhere. You know, they lack economies of scale. Grading standards are very low, which are required for consistency of the products. You know, the linking, for example, with the raisins of supermarkets that we're seeing in Africa. And yesterday, I think we have learned that when these big multinationals come in, they tend to, you know, in Africa at least, they're not integrate well with the local sector. So how do you resolve that? Environment, yes, you know, but farmers, especially smallholder farmers, they have lived by the day, and they need to cut those trees, which is one of the things that we have seen, slashing and burning, and also, you know, energy needs. How do you resolve that? What do you tell policymakers? FDI for extractive industry is a reality in Mozambique, and that has a potential to divert resources that we're thinking should go into agriculture to increase productivity. And we know labor costs will go up, especially for those who have the skills. And consolidation often requires more intensive production techniques and more skills. Returns to intervention underestimated. Again, this reminds me of lack of good data, especially in Mozambique. Maybe also our toolkits need to be revisited. Transparency in policy. One thing that we've seen, and again, going back to the private sector, is that most countries there would not be transparent in policy setting. And it's hard to predict what will happen next. And if you're in the private sector, you may, for example, be importing corn or maize from South Africa because there's a demand in Maputo, and then suddenly the government is stepping in. Yes. Okay, I am done. Okay, thank you.
Sorry for being hard because we have 5 speakers in 1.5 hours, and also we ran a little bit late. Still, give a chance for the question, one from a man, one from a woman. Then first man.
Thank you. My name is Jon Sunelius from the University of Helsinki. I'm an agriculture economist. My question is, given that both public and private investment in agriculture would be quite beneficial from food security point of view, I'm now speaking particularly to Per Pinstrup Andersen, which are the biggest obstacles for this? Why is not more invested in agriculture research? Furthermore, everybody can answer to my second question. What is your view on the opportunities and threats with genetically modified organisms or plants bred through GMOs? Thank you.
The women from this one, and a direct question. After question, each speaker have 2 minutes response, and then we have a coffee break for you to chat. Okay, please.
Thank you. The question about the genetically modified stuff was going to be my second question too. But my name is Mina Baliamulutz. I'm a professor at the University of North Florida and also senior research fellow at the African Center for Economic Transformation in Ghana. And right now we are focusing on transformation in the agricultural sector. And all 3 presentations were really excellent. Maybe my question is to address to Rabvas. Everybody talks about the need, and we do too, about the need to provide support to small farmers. It goes from the Gates Foundation to pretty much everybody. But really, when we think about transformation, it includes the fact that you want farmers to use some of the modern tools in agriculture, right, to increase productivity. And sometimes that's not really automatic with smallholders, no matter what we do. So we need really a medium-sized farmers, which are we call the missing middle in Africa in agriculture. And I was wondering if you have any suggestion on how to develop a sizable, medium-sized farms in Africa. These are the ones that's going to be linked, and the second discussant talked about the multinationals when they come to Africa. If we had those, they will link better with them than they could ever do with the small farmers that are all over the place. Thank you.
First
Okay, now thank you, and thank you for the questions. Let me combine a few things said by Emilia, also by Jandina, and your question. Maybe around how should we do this, right? That was bottom line. So how and who should we be supporting? I think there's a number of pathways out of it, and also how we approach it in FVO. I think the critical thing is in all of this is first find the catalyst for change. Give one example. Northern Ghana, we have a project where the catalyst for change are two, to change things around for smallholder farmers and the broader rural livelihoods. One is organize the farmers better, right? Farm size matters if there's economies of scale involved, right? And make farms more efficient. So one way is you can enlarge the scale of each individual farm, or you can also, through stronger producer organizations and collectively organize extension services and other things. So that's the one thing we work on. So how can they overcome their hurdles in that sense? The second thing is in bringing marketing and particularly processing capacity locally, such that very simple things, these are actually low-hanging fruits, but it doesn't happen if you bring things together. Take cassava producers, right? You know, cassava is a very perishable product, right? In Northern Ghana, many farmers, they all produce cassava in big quantities, right? And they all produce in the same cycle. So if you don't have processing capacity, you don't have storage capacity, what happens? The price plunges when you harvest, and you lose a lot of your produce in the end of the day. So by bringing organization, by bringing processing capacity, that is now catalyzing a change there, and not just for cassava, but also for other production. And then what we've been doing there, on top of that, is connect that with further up the value chain with the private sector, with the beverage industry, for instance, that's interested in making beer from cassava, as one example, and others. So that's one pathway, that may differ from context to context. And likewise, you can do it also with that, combine it with better and more sustainable agricultural practices. And I'll give one more example, if I may, which I think is an interesting example to look at, which I think works particularly for the poorest of the poor. India has probably the largest poverty reduction program in the world, called the National Rural Livelihoods Mission. That caters for, at the moment, for 250 million people, is to cater for 500 million people. Okay. What they do there is also organize farmers and local villagers, particularly led by women, in ways that they can share their concerns. They form savings and loan groups, so they start creating their own means. And we support that by bringing in sustainable agricultural practices that shift them away from the modern farming that is more expensive and less tailored to their needs, also onto polycrop farming. They've now become food secure, but also income secure in ways that they start investing more into their future. I think those examples you can do. It's not the only way to do it, but I think there's a way to do it. But it has to come together, and also the infrastructure investments in order to get the food both to markets, but also to help people access basic services and be better connected is another critical thing that needs to happen. I'll stop there. Lots of other things, more things to see, but the chair won't allow me.
Well, I certainly won't say anything about GMOs. I'll leave that to Per, since I agree with him, but let him say the bad stuff. So I take the credit for it. Actually, I will just make a couple of quick points. One is on the transformation of the agriculture sector. As I said in passing, I think there's little doubt that we need to think about that transformation. Is that on now? Yeah. That transformation in the context of a larger set of development challenges, which is, and not to take the kind of potentially the more extreme view, for example, that Paul Collier has raised in some of his reports for DFID about the diminishing the importance of agriculture altogether. But I think the reality is that the big challenge in much of the poorest countries, regions of the world, is that we have this rapid process of urbanization going on, which will continue. And we have to feed that urban population, which is largely, in fact, being done by imports because of the low productivity of indigenous or domestic agriculture. Am I done already? God. And the poor quality of kind of infrastructure. It's just a lot cheaper to bring food from Thailand than it is to Conakry than it is from the interior of Guinea to the city. And you were alluding to this in your points about Mozambique. So, when I think about the question then that you ask about investment in agriculture, I think we need to think about that less in terms of the traditional thought process of agricultural research in the context of crop-specific, improving the not that we don't worry about improving the yields and even the quality of certain products, but we need to think about it in a much broader set of development objectives that revolve around both understanding the transformation is going to move people out of rural areas, whether or not we say it's good or not, that the share of people in agriculture, people employed in agriculture has to decline, that we have to feed this massively growing urban population, that we have all these environmental and climate goals that we never had on the table years ago. So, and then that we have to recognize that what we've done in the food system is just not going to be healthy in the long term. We don't need more cereals and oil seeds that are extracted at a low cost. We need a much more diverse diet. We need a healthier diet. And so we just have a whole different set of questions. So, I do get worried, particularly with the focus on agriculture per se, or an agricultural investment, that we make sure that we keep that subject or view that subject in a very broad context. One other very quick point related to that is that, it goes back to my final issue, which I didn't expand upon, is that in my narrow worldview, I always think inevitably about agriculture and its role in improving nutrition. And just so we understand, though, that nobody at any meeting I ever go to practically says, well, what do we have to do to improve investment or increase the amount of investment in nutrition? It's generally just because we don't have nutrition ministries, we don't have large nutrition constituencies. Not that I don't love people in agricultural ministries or in departments of agricultural economics, but we really, I would often hope that we keep our eyes on the ultimate prize here, which is really improving the health and nutrition and the economic well-being of the populations that the agricultural sector is so critical to.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me just follow up with what David said. I think we should gradually come to the appreciation that agriculture is increasingly becoming a producer of raw material for the value chain. So what the consumer eats is more and more different from what the farmer is producing. That's notwithstanding a very large number of smallholder, semi-subsistence farmers that are still consuming much of what they produce. But even they send, for example, the wheat to the miller. So there is a certain amount of processing which opens the opportunity for fortification, for example. So just like we would never blame the steel mill for a murder by a knife, we shouldn't necessarily blame agriculture for the fancy foods in Tanzania. Those fancy foods are being produced after they leave the farm. And my suggestion, Blandina, is you make fruits, vegetables, and eggs fancy, and working with the processing sector to change from high sugar, high sweetener, high fat, empty calorie type stuff to something that you and I would really like to see people consume. Can that be done? I believe so. Have we tried? No, absolutely not. We're circling around that private sector processing sector as though they are a holy cow not to be touched. We need to talk to them. They are not interested in killing people. They're not interested in making people sick. They're interested in making money. They can make money producing what they should be producing for the consumer. Consumer can be convinced, I believe, to produce what is better for them, because I don't want to get sick, neither does anybody else. So that's my promotional speech. Goal number 17, absolutely, we need to stress implementation. We can keep talking until, as the Americans say, the cows come home. I'm not quite sure where that comes from, but it's not going to do any good unless it's implemented. Emilio, I think it's very important that the design and implementation of policies are made on the basis of context-specific knowledge, information. And that means we can't sit in Helsinki to design policies for, probably not even for Finland, but certainly not for any country outside of that. So I'm completely with you. We just completed a study of the political economy of food price policy in 14 developing countries. And one of the many this is jointly with WIDER, unfortunately we don't have time to present it at this meeting, but one of the interesting findings is that the fluctuations, the volatility in the world market food prices may be very different from the volatility in the national food prices, particularly in landlocked countries, but also in many other, and I suspect, I haven't looked at the correlation between prices in Mozambique and prices in the world market, but my guess is that they may be quite different. The fluctuations may be quite different. And it's very interesting that some of the volatility we see in, for example, landlocked African countries, the volatility is much more severe than it ever was in the international market. But nobody cared about it. It wasn't until the international market food price fluctuations became obvious that the news media became interested. This is one of the key issues that unless we're really serious about dealing with the problems where they are, namely at the household level and at the farm level, we may not ever get there. A couple of other things, Madam Chair, and then I'll be done. Infrastructure versus research. There are so many projects that have been implemented in smallholder farming communities where the project made available the inputs needed at a reasonable price and purchased the output at a reasonable price. Those farmers doubled, tripled, quadrupled their yields over a matter of a year or two. There is an immense amount of underutilized capacity in these smallholder farms. So it doesn't do any good to tell those farmers to produce more, or to say, why don't you buy some technology from Monsanto, some improved varieties, because they're in a straitjacket. So we need to focus on opening up that straitjacket so they can buy inputs at reasonable prices, and so they have a market for their products. Final point on GMOs. I think it's very important that all of us focus on all of the opportunities that science can offer to solve the food, agriculture, and nutrition problem, particularly as we enter into the climate change that we are not willing to do something about. We should talk about mitigation. We should talk about adaptation, because there's no political will to really deal with mitigation. We need science to help us solve these problems that we've been talking about. And yes, transgenic approaches may well be the way to go. But every country should have a chance to decide whether they want transgenic or not. Or for that matter, whether they want modern science or not. There are people who would like to just ignore all scientific approaches. And then there are people who want traditional plant breeding, but they have no idea what plant breeding is about these days. We are nuking this stuff. This is a lot worse than GMOs, but that's okay because we don't know about it. If Finland wants to outlaw GMOs for food and agriculture, but keep it for health, it's their choice. Denmark, and that's where I come from, just approved the planting of one kind of genetically modified maize, that's their choice. What we must not do as Europeans is to tell other countries, whether it's Tanzania, Mozambique, or any other country, that because we don't want it, or rather we don't need it, they shouldn't have it either. That's what worries me about the whole debate about GMO. Not whether the Danes eat GMO or not, we will survive with or without. But I really think we need to respect different cultures, different problems, and let people make their own decisions. And that was my second advocacy.
I have to
Thank
ask
you.
Per one quick question, though.
No,
Do you
you
think
can't.
there's any safety reason that, from the point of human health,
There
that
are
people
lots
should
of
not consume GMO products?
No, but there are lots of food safety issues. If you are allergic to peanuts, please don't eat peanuts. They are not genetically modified. Stay away from them. If you are intolerant to milk, don't drink milk. There are lots of food safety issues. There are lots of toxins out there. Yes, we need to test these things to make sure they're safe for consumption, whether it's GMOs or something else. Absolutely. Does that answer your question?
No, you didn't give me a clear answer. Do you know of any evidence that GMOs
No.
have been a hazard?
No.
Perhaps
No.
we start with GMO, because I should be responsible to leave the time for the audience and also our outstanding speakers, commentators, the time for coffee. They provide us so rich resource information and knowledges. Also, our audience raised excellent question, although we don't have time for everyone. So the better time is for the coffee to discussion and enjoy your drink. Let's give thanks to all of them.